Great Nicobar Island. It is one of the most beautiful pieces of forest that we have left. But do we really need to destroy 130 square kilometers of pristine rainforest? The developer would have to pay something of the order of 10 lakhs. It's not even the price of an SUV. And they make news. They don't make forests.
Currently, we are at 176th position, second to the lowest in the latest environmental performance index globally.
45,000 saplings were going to be planted in a hectare. The dense rainforests of the Western Ghats would have maybe 800 trees a hectare.
We are talking about a forest which has been grown over a period of 50, 100 years. How do you compensate that? It is impossible.
Clear that there is a very large commercial and tourism angle to this project.
This is Rohit Verma, your host for Some Like It Wild podcast. Today's episode is supported by Dholsten, our eco stay in Bandipur National Park, a dear friend who came on board to support a great cause, which is Some Like It Wild. The guest for this podcast is someone who imagines that he's a writer turned wildlife scientist turned writer. He has written and co-authored many books that includes Wild Heart of India, Pillars of Life, At the Feet of Living Things, 25 Years of Wildlife Research and Conservation in India. And his recent book is The Trees of My Country, A Natural History of India in 50 Trees. He is Dr. Shankar Raman, also known as Sridhar, or Sridhar, also known as Shankar Raman. Thank you, Sridhar, for coming over here to record this podcast. We have multiple topics to discuss, and I want to start off with something which has really been bothering all of us right now. Is that we see the forest being cleared across India. Talk about Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, even Rajasthan, Sariska. Students protested recently for their rights on a clean education, and the battle was fought very well. Similar way, if you look at even in the people did stand up for the whole Rishikesh Bhainawala project for the road widening, and they were there fighting and holding on to it. They did get a temporary relief, which is kind of a good news. But overall, if you look at, we are not uh, hearing good news like this. These are the two recent ones which we could hear. If you look at the way we are doing currently, we are at 176th position, second to the lowest in the latest environmental performance index globally. This article was published in Wire recently. So if you look at overall scenario, the picture in India is bit problematic. Do you really have any hope for the environment in India?
First off, yeah, thank you for having me on this show. And bit problematic is an understatement. We are in a very serious position as far as environment in India is concerned, and it's not just in the context of forests or trees or wildlife. It's much wider problem. Our rivers are heavily polluted. We have serious air pollution problems. Climate change is affecting India very badly, and many of the species that we are interested in conserving, they are on the decline. So it is a very serious issue, but I do have a lot of hope. And you just referred to the protests. They've been truly inspiring. The student protests, they've shown us how it can be done, how to bring about change, and how to do it through peaceful protests in a democratic framework. And I think such kinds of movements are increasingly required. We have to um, channel our knowledge of what is going on into action on the streets as well. And I think that also served in the Rishikesh case that you just
Yes.
mentioned. And there are many such examples. For instance, near Hyderabad, There's this the Chavella banyans, these ancient banyans which were along the road were slated to be felled, and citizens got together and really did a campaign to protect the banyans. And then there are examples from Bangalore city. There are examples from Delhi on this, but the larger tide of change is very concerning. Recently I think there's a news came out and it was disclosed also in Parliament, if I recall correctly, that close to 3 million trees, or 2.8 million trees, were slated for felling in just the last 3 years, and this is what is officially recorded
That's a declared number.
yes, correct. Yeah, they've given permission to fell close to 3 million trees. That's a million trees a year across India. The actual number is likely to be much higher because of a lot of collateral damage that happens in these projects and so on. But these protests that we have seen recently show us the way that if we are really concerned about this, we must start speaking about it more. We must do it imaginatively. I mean, I just loved some of the memes that came out during these protests. We should use all possible, channels and engage citizens. This is something that affects everyone, and so I think I have hope that we will move towards that in the near future.
So when government decides on doing these kind of, I'm going to use the word destruction of the forest, they are supposed to be apex bodies who are being consulted by scientists like you. Are you saying that the government is completely ignoring the direction or recommendation being given by these apex bodies?
I'm not saying they're completely ignoring, but the system itself is not set up very well. So, what I mean by that is that when let's say a project is coming up and it's called a development project, but like you say, it ends up being a very destructive development project because it's not planned well. The impact is not assessed
Assessed
really
well.
well. Yeah. So you're supposed to carry out a fairly comprehensive social and environmental impact assessment and come up with an environmental management plan. And the environmental impact assessments are often done by agencies who are hired to do this. And they are hired by the project proponents themselves. So there is a
That's the
fundamental
irony.
conflict of interest there, which has never been adequately resolved. There are committees at the center and at the state, but the work on the ground to do the assessments is being done by these agencies, and they're producing these tomes and lots of documents, which whose quality is up to question. I know of major projects, including the recent one in Great Nicobar that's being planned, where the EIA is done in a matter of a few days. They have
Yeah, I think
not
it was
even
7 days they published
7
the whole
days or
report.
8
Yeah.
days, and they
Yeah.
said the forest, the person actually writes in the EIA saying this forest is so dense that we could not go in to carry out the survey, so we just did this along the road. Something words to that effect is there in the EIA, and how reliable are these documents? So I think that's a failing. We need to have a way to separate that assessment process from the project proponents. It has to be done. India has a lot of scientific capacity, and we
Yes.
have people who work very strongly with civil society, with local communities who may be impacted by these projects. They need to be involved in developing that plan, in doing the assessments, in doing the plans to mitigate the damage that they identify, or to avoid the damage first of all. And if there is some damage uh, that you can't avoid, then you try and mitigate its consequences. So we need to create that system, a very different system of assessing these projects before we can really rely on what's being produced in these documents. And I think that's missing. So that's one of the fundamental reasons for a lot of these projects causing much more harm than good.
Here, the examples what we are talking about, either as a Rishikesh or Hyderabad or Bangalore or even Ken Betwa, it is all happening in a local level or maybe at a regional level. At a national level, we are not able to create this kind of a movement. How can we create a movement and when the citizens really, really get bothered and say, no, this is not done?
If you look at it in the light of nature conservation, a lot of people think nature is something somewhere else. You have
Hmm.
to go to see nature. You
Yeah.
know, it's not where we are.
Yeah.
It's not in our cities. I have to travel to,
To a jungle to
to a
see it.
jungle or to
Yeah.
a, faraway place to see it. I think that concept has to change. We need to realize that we are part of nature, and nature is all around us. It is there in our cities, and uh, it is there in the countryside, and it is there in even in those remote areas. So that awareness that we are intimately connected to nature, I think, is the first step. Then understanding these issues, what exactly is going on, is a little more difficult for people to understand, perhaps, than something as direct as your child's schooling or
Education, schooling. Yeah.
education. And I feel there, people who are campaigners, who are environmental campaigners, who are researchers, who are scientists, who are studying nature, we have we have to do much more to convey those issues in a manner to the wider public and engage them in these sort of campaigns and protests to bring about change.
That's where I should talk about your book. You have been an author. You have co-authored many books, and you have a recent book which you have introduced last couple of weeks. The trees of my country: a natural history of India and 50 trees. So, with my basic research which I did, India has got more than 2,600 native species. You chose 50. How did you choose those 50?
With great difficulty and with a lot of you know angst, because there's so many favorite trees, and obviously you can't do a book on all of them. And there may be up to 3,000 trees. We don't even know exactly how many
Yeah,
species
yeah,
there are,
yeah.
but it's likely to be around 3,000. And so the way that this book came about was to tell the story of India, and the natural history of India through trees. And native trees are particularly useful for that because they belong in these ecosystems. They've been there for a long time, and they're literally rooted to place, right? And so they are well connected to the environment. They document changes in history. They're like living historians of place. So, but uh, how do you pick the 50 that can tell the story and cover the entire ground? All the way from Lakshadweep and Andaman Nicobar Islands to the mountains and central India, northeast India. So, along with Divya's help, we made a preliminary list, which was a little over 100 species there. And that list did not just have species suitable for the book, but also a lot of our personal favorites. And with some difficulty, I had to leave a few of those out and came down. But what I've tried to do is balance the regional coverage of species. So I've picked species from all the different kinds of ecosystems that we see in India, from the hot deserts to the cold deserts, mangroves, littoral forests, dry deciduous forests, evergreen forests, the entire range of vegetation that you see from the foothills of the Himalaya to the trans-Himalayan cold desert steppes. So when I had that, I picked the species that would capture that, and I had to drop some yeah, which was a difficult choice, but that's
So
how that
you
happened.
have looked at these trees as characters, if I'm not wrong, and you have defined it like that. So out of these 50, which is your favorite character?
Uh, so many of them.
Let's
It's
talk about one of them.
yeah. The one closest to home is a personal favorite. Is this tree called the Kullenia exarelata, or Vedipla in Tamil. It's an important rainforest tree of
Mhm.
the Western Ghats, found in the uh, uh, mid elevation zone in the southern Western Ghats. It's a favorite food of the lion-tailed macaque. It has this big spiky fruit like a durian, and very interesting tree. The flowers attract a lot of wildlife. The fruits attract the macaques, and the tree itself is really beautiful to look at. The leaves are beautiful. The tree is grand. So that's a certainly a favorite. But there are many others. The juniper in Ladakh that I've written about, the living root bridges tree in Meghalaya. So these are some of them.
You have also spoken about or written about a tree in Nicobar, the
Hmm.
bittersweet.
Hmm.
And I think in 80s there was a specimen in one of those museums, and then recently another specimen was documented. Unfortunately, you could never travel to Nicobar.
Yeah, that was we made two efforts to go to Nicobar to see this. This tree is called Nicobariodendron slumeri. So it's a tree named after the island, the tree of Nicobar, and slumeri refers to a botanist because the tree was named after a botanist. It is known only right now from herbarium specimens. There have been botanists who visited the island. They've seen the tree. They've collected specimens, and we have them now in these herbarium as dry twigs. But as far as I know, nobody has photographed the tree. Nobody has studied it or described what it looks like. We don't know what animals come to the tree. And what's unique about it is that it's the only species in its genus. Nicobariodendron is a new genus. It's found only in Great Nicobar and one of the other islands in the Nicobar archipelago. So it's a fairly evolutionarily distinct species. So it would have been really lovely to have a chance to go and see it. We made two trips, and both times just bad luck. The two ships got cancelled. The flight that was going there had some engine trouble or whatever, and we just couldn't make it. So I'm still hoping to go there someday and see it. But
I
yeah.
really hope so. It happens soon before it gets destroyed.
That's true, and that's the backdrop of that
We will have
particular.
a much detailed discussion on the whole Nicobar project. So, how this book is different from the other books which you have either written or co-authored?
Um, okay, I can talk about how this book is different from, say, other books on trees of
Please.
India,
Yeah.
as well as
Yeah.
my earlier work. So when I started writing this book on trees, I first, of course, looked up what else is there. There have been books on trees of India. And I felt that there was something missing because
Mhm.
these trees are really interesting in their own right. And their connections to the environment, to plants, to other plants, to the birds, mammals, insects that use them. And we now have a lot of knowledge coming from natural history studies, ecological studies of these species. And I wanted to bring that in. The second thing that I feel I wanted this book to be different from all the others is to look at trees as beings, as
The living
beings
beings.
with rich lives of their own. Very often we don't do that. We
Yeah.
make trees. Most of the writing about trees will say it is like this and it is like that. And I have the entire book doesn't have a
Doesn't have
single
it.
it while
Yeah.
referring to a tree. And many indigenous people in India and elsewhere in the world, and also I think a lot of people do perceive individual trees as beings, and and not as mere objects that are there to give us something. When I was writing the book, many people would ask me, "Oh, are you going to describe what are the various uses of the tree
Hmm.
when you write about?" I said, "No, we can't just look at a tree as if it's a catalog of uses for us. It's very sort of inward looking. I wanted to focus more on the tree itself. What does the tree require? What is it that we can give the tree rather than what the tree can give us?" So those kind of motivations led me to put this book together. And it's very different from my earlier book, The Wild Heart of India, which is a collection of my writings, which engages with all the different areas of work that I've had to, had the chance of doing over these years. But the direct sort of antecedent or progenitor of this of the trees book is actually this one. It's called Pillars of
The
Life.
Pillars of Life. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a book that Divya and I did in 2018, just to get people interested in the beautiful trees of the Western Ghats and particularly the rainforests. And it has, of course, the Collenia and many other species that are our personal favorites in there. And yeah, so that's how it
So,
led to
when you
this
were
book as
doing
well.
this book, did you even meet up with the local communities, had conversations with them, got the anecdotes from them?
In some cases, yes.
Okay.
So, for instance, the chapter on the Sampigate tree. which is Magnolia Champaka. In Bangalore, we have the Sampige Road, right? I don't know if it has any Sampige trees left on it, but we travel to the Biligiri Rangan Hills and to see the Dodda Sampige, this magnificent tree that is there, and met with Soliga people there. Karana Ketagowda, he had composed this beautiful poem song about the tree itself, and I've written about that in that chapter. Then I traveled to Northeast India and I went up to Dibang Valley, where I traveled with the Idu Mishmi community, people there who know that entire landscape very intimately. So they're, learning from them how they view the landscape, and they view it very, very differently from the way we would view the landscape. So that's common. In a few other cases, I could not directly engage, but I looked up what others had studied about the species by working or learning from communities, like the toko palm, the palm tree that you see in Northeast India. So very nice studies have been carried out on it with the Adi community there, and I've tried to bring that in. When writing about junipers, I looked up what the people of Ladakh have themselves written about it and cataloged its value to them. So yeah, I've tried to bring those in these essays as well.
Yeah, because most of the local communities, for them, they literally worship the trees. If Central India talk about Maua, they worship it, literally worship it.
Yeah.
And then the other trees, which they call as a Bada Dev. So worshipping the tree has been there with the local communities forever. So that's the reason I thought that I'm sure that you would have had interaction with the local communities and looked at the way they define the trees.
Yeah. Certainly true, and it's not just worship. There is an understanding that trees are animate,
Hmm.
and in many cases, people do believe that there are certain spirits that reside in the tree,
Yes.
which becomes their way of relating to the forest and to the trees, etc. As in the case in even in the Bang Valley, for instance. But I think the kind of association that people have with trees, even trees like the sal, from which they may derive a lot of uses, is still relational. The value is relational. It's like the tree is my relation. It's not just an object out there from which I can harvest things. And I think that relational connection that people have with trees with indigenous, many forest dwellers and indigenous people have with trees, is different from the more instrumental, utilitarian way that we look at trees. And even in the context of the forest, laws that we discussed earlier, that's how our government is looking at trees now, right? You can destroy a forest in one place,
Yeah.
and you can just replace it with a
Which they
completely
think
different.
that they can replace
Yeah,
it.
which you
It's just
imagine that it can be
yeah,
replaced somewhere
it
else.
is. Yeah,
Yeah,
just a vague imagination that you can go and replace it. A forest has been there for 20, 50, 100 odd years, and you cut down that whole forest and think that you can go and replicate or create a forest in some other place is a quite a vague
yeah.
thought itself. Okay, I really want you to do the honors, please. The book is here. Pen is here.
Sure. Okay, I'll.
Okay.
This for you.
This for me.
There you go. Hope you like
Thank
it.
you. Thank you, Sridhar. Thanks a lot. Okay, so let's go back in time. And I want to go back in time when you were doing a research. This is late 90s, I think 1996, in some cardamom abandoned shed. That's where you started out doing a research. And your research was very much focused on the rainforest bird community ecology. I really want to understand what is this rainforest bird community ecology. So that is my first thing. And I also want to know that why did you choose KMTR to do your research and some abandoned area which had no accommodation, no electricity, obviously no network. Maybe I don't know how many kilometers you used to walk to reach to your field station or a field place. So let's go back in time and
Sure. Yeah, I've been interested in birds since childhood. I've been birding since the age of 11, and but when it came to my my own research as I actually started off with field projects on very different groups. I did a field study on cheetal and black buck in a Gindi National Park in Chennai, and I came back to birds to start studying birds and not just watching them as an amateur bird watcher during my master's research.
Okay.
That was first in Mizoram in northeast India, but that was also in a rainforest, and I got um, very interested in this what you just mentioned, no, the rainforest bird community. So what is that rainforest bird community, and what structures or what creates that? I was able to go into it a little more detail in my doctoral work, and the doctoral work was in Kalakkad Mundandurai Tiger Reserve. And if you've visited and if you're interested in rainforests, and if you visited Kalakkad Mundandurai Tiger Reserve, then you basically immediately see why it's such a wonderful landscape to do this kind of studies, or even just to be there. So our field research station was way up in the mountains. You have to travel about 18 kilometers by road from Kalakkad village, and then you stop at a forest camp, and then you hike up nearly 1.5 kilometers. You have to carry all your supplies, your gas cylinder and everything. You have to lug it up. And there was an abandoned cardamom plantation, and they had an old house there which was not being used now, and that had been taken up as the field research station by a Wildlife Institute of India
Oh,
team,
okay.
in which Divya was one of the students there, as well as two other colleagues were there, and I
Was
joined
it
them.
Madhusudan and
No, it
no?
was Ishwar and Karthik, two
Okay.
others. They were
Okay.
studying herpetofauna. They were studying the small mammals and small carnivores. And I came in there to study birds. So we were right there, surrounded by forests. You step out, you're in the middle of rainforest. There are two, three. There's one big river and two other streams on either side. And every morning you're just, immersed in that. There's no electricity, practically no artificial sounds except the sounds you make yourself.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's only natural sounds around you. And we were there for pretty much, I was there for at least 2.5 years. And, uh, and it was a remarkable experience. And why KMTR was particularly useful for this research is that it is one of the last areas where you have a large tract of mid elevation rainforest in relatively intact condition. There was a small cardamom plantation, sort of had been established there, but the large part of the landscape, they had no roads, and it was contiguous rainforest for 400 square kilometers of rainforest extending into the Agastyamalai hills of Kerala. And so, if you wanted to understand birds in a relatively natural setting, that was the obvious place to sort of go and do it. And what do we mean by a bird community?
Hmm.
A community is, to put it very simply, it is what are the bird species, and in sort of what arrangement of individuals do they come together and occupy a particular place at a particular time, right? So if you walk into a forest today and you're listening and you're looking around, you will detect many different species. Some will be on the ground, some will, like the woodpeckers, on the trees. You have hornbills in the canopy, and so on. So there's a set of them come together to occupy that place, and many of them are endemic. Like the white-bellied blue flycatcher is found only in the rainforest of the Western Ghats. So how is it that this set of species comes together, and why are some of them very common? Why are some of them quite rare? And what happens to this community that has occupied this place as the forest changes, as you go from forests at lower elevations to forests at higher elevations, or if the forest is converted to a cardamom plantation or to a coffee plantation or tea plantation. So the transformation of the forest can affect some birds more than the others. So my research was trying to look into those aspects, and KMTR was a very nice
It was like a
landscape to
perfect
do.
place for you to
It
do the
was, yeah,
research.
it was a wonderful place for a research station.
So, how was a research scene, or I would say the conservation space way back in 90s versus what it is today?
Um, it was um, it was quite different. I think one is that I think the pace of transformation of the forests that were left. was much less because India was just getting into this neoliberal phase, right, with liberalization and expansion of industry and so on. So and it was also at the cusp of change, given that in the 1970s and 80s we had a series of actually very good laws to protect the environment. We had the Wildlife Protection Act in 1972. We had the Forest Conservation Act in 1980, and so on, and the other Environmental Protection Act. And so many of these parks had been established, and they were about a decade, 2 decades old, and they had gained protection. The cardamom lease, which was there when it expired, they were asked to move out. Otherwise, I could have imagined it would have expanded and transformed the entire landscape if these legal protections were in there. So that it was at the cusp of that change, and India's going to take off in terms of large scale development and massive transformation. But the creation of these protected areas had also created many problems for people who had always lived there. So there was a lot of debate about how do we reconcile people and protected areas. Should all protected areas be inviolate? Should we move all the people out? That was one camp. And the other camp was saying, no, people have always lived in these forests, and actually we need their support to conserve it. And it's also unjust to just simply, relocate them. So this was the sort of ferment and the debates that was going on in the 1990s. And I think partly some of that led to the Forest Rights Act, which came later. And uh, and the challenges today are quite different from that milieu. In a way, I feel that our work and our training in that period didn't really prepare us for what was coming.
For what is coming,
Yeah,
or
and
what has
where we are
happened in
today.
last
Yeah.
minimum 1 decade or 1.5 decades. I don't even know if those acts which happen in 70s have any meaning today.
Well, I think they do. I think they do, but they have not been. We have
See,
not
it's on
had the.
paper, Sridhar. It's just been documented.
I partly yes. I would agree with you. Like for instance, the Forest Conservation Act. It's a very short act. It's just a few paragraphs, so to speak, that has helped to protect India's forests to a certain extent. But the same Forest Conservation Act has been modified and
In number of times.
diluted with
Yeah.
through amendments and
Yeah.
so on,
Yeah.
and various other kinds of orders passed by the center, and how it's implemented in the states. So the implementation has left a lot to be desired. But I think the intention of the act, the spirit of the act, is still relevant today. What we need to do is to see how we can make it more responsive, how we can use current knowledge of forests and wildlife to maybe tweak the act in the favor or in line with the original spirit of the act, rather than just diluting it to favor industrial growth or further
Yeah,
damage.
one side we talk about the destruction, as you spoke about 3 million plus trees being either already gone or going now. And then I see being published by the government that, oh, we have reclaimed or done a plantation of so many hectares of forest. The definition of forest itself has been diluted in that way.
Yeah, India doesn't have a very good definition of forest, and the fact is that we probably shouldn't have just one, because we have such a range of different ecosystems that we need that nuance to come in, and that has been challenging. The second thing is that to look at forests as something or trees as something fungible. I can destroy this here because I can always recreate it elsewhere. Our current policy in the context of development projects is that, okay, if it's absolutely necessary that this forest has to go and so many trees have to be cut, go ahead and cut it, and twice the area elsewhere you plant it with trees. And that system is now called compensatory afforestation. We have an act that drives that. There's a huge fund because the developer just pays up the money and he's asked to pay so much. And it's not a lot of money. I don't know the exact current figure, but just a few years ago, to destroy 1 hectare, okay, 1 hectare of the very best, very densest evergreen forest in India, in the Western Ghats or in, say, Arunachal Pradesh, the developer would have to pay something of the order of 10 lakhs. You know, it's not even the price of an SUV. And is that what our forests really worth? So they pay that money and it goes into a fund, and the forest and something else is planted elsewhere. And a lot of that, that leads to a whole other set of problems, because where is that planting happening? What are you planting there? Besides the fact that you're losing a very valuable ecosystem in
That is
one
what I
place.
actually started from when my second question was same thing, that all these apex bodies, they need to consult the scientist, the ecologist, the researchers, because this kind of compensatory afforestation being done in a different location, it just doesn't work. We are talking about a forest which has been grown over a period of 50, 100 years. How do you compensate that? It is impossible. In my opinion, it's impossible because we won't be able to see it happening in our own lifetime as such.
Yes, and recognizing that some of these forests are irreplaceable
Yeah,
or cannot really be compensated may change the way we view a certain project.
yeah,
We may look for alternatives, saying that, okay, if this is really valuable, then let me look for another alternative. Maybe it costs a little more, or it may change your design a bit.
yeah.
But that's not happening now, because people think that, okay, we can do this because I can replace it elsewhere. And that has to be challenged, first of all. And the compensatory afforestation is leading to a lot of additional problems. People are going and planting trees in areas that where trees should not be
Should
planted.
not be there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and like in grasslands and deserts and so on. But having said that, I feel that there is a role for very informed tree planting or ecosystem, what we today call ecosystem or ecological restoration programs. There are many growing number of examples in India where people are bringing back the appropriate ecosystem to areas that were formerly damaged. So if you have older areas that are damaged, you can do something to make them better, but you can probably never recreate everything that was lost in the original ecosystem. That's why they are
Yeah, so
irreplaceable.
I surely want to have a much deeper discussion on this, Shidhar, because there are a lot of terminologies being used and it's pretty confusing for a normal person to understand. So, surely want to get into a larger discussion on that. But what I really wanted to know, because see, you were also doing a more animal ecology, and even Divya was more focused on doing a animal ecology. What made you to shift from animal ecology to the plant ecology, if I may call it?
Well, if you're working in rainforest, first of all, you can't really avoid being mindful of the trees, the ecosystem, particularly trees, right? And then it becomes a window to other plant life as well. But for us, at least for me, it was definitely being mesmerized by the trees in that forest ecosystem. That was one. The second thing is that if you're really studying some species, you will very quickly realize that the trees and the forest are not just backdrop. They are intimately connected to them. So Divya studied hornbills earlier, and then the a carnivorous mammal called the brown palm civet. It seems like, okay, it's a carnivore. It can still, doesn't have to do anything with plants. But it turns out that just like hornbills, even these civets eat a lot of fruits of rainforest trees. So you need to know what's their food. You have to know what's the tree whose fruits that the animal is consuming. And in my bird research, I found that the kinds of trees that are there in a forest and the structure of the forest, which is often
Yeah.
contributed by the trees and the other layers of vegetation, influence what birds are found there. So I needed to know, it can't just be any tree, because in a cardamom plantation or eucalyptus plantation is also full of trees, but it's just one species of tree and it's of one kind, and it has a completely different set of birds in it, right? So getting to know which species of trees are there and in what relative abundance, as we say, was very important, and that was our window into the world of plants. And yeah, so that's how that
Is it
that came about.
the brown palm civet? seeded a thought of doing a rainforest restoration?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because in in one of the chapters I've written about in the Wild Art of India, I've recounted this about how Divya was doing these experiments to look at whether the dispersal of seeds through the droppings or the scats of brown palm civets helped the regeneration of those tree species. And she found some evidence for it in a few species that the civet was actually helping the forest regenerate itself.
I think Divya also mentioned that they are the farmers of the forest.
Yes, they are. It's a term that's used for many species,
Many
like
species,
even
including the civet.
including the
Hornbills
hornbills, the
also.
civets. They play that role
Yeah,
of what is called seed dispersal,
yeah.
frugivory, that's the eating of fruits,
Flugivore,
and
yes.
seed dispersal, which is moving seeds to other spots where they have a good chance to grow, leading to possibly regeneration of the forest. So that that idea came about through that, and we also realized that we could grow a lot of these rainforest trees. Earlier we thought it's a very difficult task. Getting to know the trees itself was
Yeah,
difficult to start
yeah.
with, and then to know whether we can raise those trees to plant in a degraded site was something in the background, but it became real when we saw these little seedlings popping out of this scat,
Scans.
or the seeds from the scats. And so that led to thoughts about trying to grow these plants and bring them back to formerly degraded areas for maybe trying to bring a semblance of that original rainforest back.
So, Shida, before we discuss the whole rainforest restoration journey, there are a lot of words being used loosely, and most of the people may not have the actual understanding of these words. For example, plantation, afforestation, assisted natural regeneration, artificial regeneration, and also ecological restoration. I wanted you to talk about these so that people have a clarity that what does these mean. And I want you to go in bit detail about the ecological restoration. What is it actually?
Yeah. I can add two more also:
Yeah, yeah, please.
reclamation, rehabilitation. There's a whole lot of them. And I think that's also a problem with with scientists and with people like us who work in the field, is that we often come up with these terms and jargon and don't do enough to convey what it actually means. But today there are some groups who are actively trying to make this much more easily understandable to a wide audience. Internationally, there's a Society for Ecological Restoration that does this. In India, we are part of a group called the Ecological Restoration Alliance that's doing
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
But what does it actually mean? Now, I think that when you, if I had to say it simply, these are ways of trying to revive the earth, okay, revive land, revive nature. And there is no one particular way of doing it. There is a continuum. Think of it as a gradient, that you can do some very simple, very basic things that may contribute a little bit to bringing about change, to something that's a far more involved and more intensive. And so the kind of action that you do is relates to these different terminologies. At one end, you have things like reclamation, rehabilitation, and regreening, where the effort is simply to bring back some kind of green cover to an area that has been damaged or destroyed. So it looks unsightly. There used to be something there, it's gone. I just want to quickly establish something, some greenery. So you're not really paying attention to the ecosystem or what the area might need, what could have been there earlier. Those thoughts are not there. I use what's available, what's convenient, and put some plants back there. So that's at one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum, or another approach is to work and leverage the power of nature itself. Nature is not static, right? All ecosystems are themselves self-renewing. It's like we have a wound and it heals. You have a damage to an ecosystem, even if it's a simple one tree fall or if it's a clearing, nature regenerates. And that process of regeneration, if we can assist it, that is called assisted natural regeneration. So you go in and in a very targeted way, you may remove some weeds, you may create some spaces for particular plants to establish, and you working with nature, giving it a little extra boost. Ecological restoration, the approach that we personally favor and where we've spent more than 20 odd years of our life doing, really begins where you start paying attention to what is the ecosystem and what are the species that I am trying to revive in a given area. And the focus is on native species. So you have to understand the land, you have to read the landscape well. You have to say, okay, this is an area that was a grassland earlier. And I need to know what were the grasses, what were the native grasses that were once found here. And I try and bring that back. So where you start focusing on native plant recovery, that is where ecological restoration starts. And it's distinct from most of these other approaches. The other aspect that sets ecological restoration apart from these other approaches is that I have a target ecosystem. And we use the word a reference ecosystem or a benchmark ecosystem. The example I just gave, it was a grassland. It could be a forest. Like, I worked in Kalakkad, Mundandurai, and in the Anamalai Hills, there are some beautiful intact tracts of tropical rainforest inside these areas. And there may be other areas which had been logged in the past, or which had been converted to coffee, or which had been, to eucalyptus plantation. And I want to bring them back. And I can say, okay, at this elevation for this rainfall, this is the kind of ecosystem that would have once existed. It would have been a rainforest. It would have had all these species, 80 different tree species per hectare. And so I focus on those native species that are suitable for that ecosystem and start bringing them back. That action and the actions that we do to assist the recovery of the native ecosystem is ecological restoration. So I don't know if that covers it, but basically what I want to say is that there is a spectrum of actions. You may use one of the other approaches for it.
Is that what government has been doing it? Because we see a lot of plantation drives being done by the government, even by the other organizations, including the corporates, that they figure out some fast-growing tree species and they just want to do a quick fix, if I call it,
Correct. Yes.
and do this kind of plantation, which we recently saw it in Bangalore outskirts.
Yeah.
1.5 million trees being planted in 12 hours time and
Yeah.
created a Guinness World Record.
Yeah.
Does it really help?
I am skeptical about these efforts, and I think at the wider scale, we've had this sort of thing being done in places like mined areas. After mining, they have to do some rehabilitation, so they go and plant acacia, one species. It'll quickly establish, and you'll have some kind of greenery and so on. And you use the word plantation, and we often try and explain that plantations are very different from forests or ecological restoration. Most often, plantations are focused on one or a few species. And the set of species that are chosen are based on convenience, what is available, what is quick to grow, what the cows will not, browse, etc. And it often ends up being a complete mix of species. And then they are being planted out in these massive drives, right? So the government, under the compensatory afforestation program, on the one hand, is doing a lot of planting all over India. But if you look at the data, more than half of that planting involves 1 to 5 species. You can go to any Indian forest and you will find, such a diversity of species. But all these plantations are just putting a handful of species. Some of them are not even native to that area, and they're being planted out of convenience. The other kinds of drive that you mentioned, like what happened recently in Bangalore, there are many, many, many such examples today, and they make news. They don't make forests.
Yeah, they
right?
make news.
People are doing it, chasing some record, chasing some target, and they're doing it with the best of intentions. And these are people who are volunteering their time and effort. I really appreciate them for their interest in doing this. But I like to tell this that everyone thinks that they are planting trees, but nobody plants trees. We plant saplings. We want to grow trees.
Yeah.
And that's a totally different ball game. You have to invest time, energy, and effort over a long stretch of time to make sure that the trees establish. If it's a place where trees should be established, you have to invest that. So someone who does that, does a small number of trees in an area that used to be a forest earlier, and he selects the right species, puts them, looks after them, is probably doing a lot more of value than these, one day record chasing kind of tree planting, seed bombing. That's another fad that's come. People are just throwing crores
Seeds.
of seed balls. They don't even know what seeds are there. It could be an
No idea.
invasive species, it could be anything. And it's just being lobbed here and there in the hope that somehow the forest will spring back. Um, uh, Another aspect that I have to mention it is Miyawaki plantations.
Miyawaki, yeah.
Yeah, that's another craze, particularly among urban developers.
Yes.
It's maybe one of the attractiveness of Miyawaki plantations is so expensive. It could be a lucrative project to do Miyawaki plantations everywhere. It's very intensive. You dig out the soil, you pour water, and you pack trees in such enormous high densities, which you don't see anywhere in nature, that you create thickets. You're not even creating plantations or forests, you're creating a new category of vegetation called thickets. They all grow like thickets. And I learned recently of one example where 45,000 saplings were going to be planted in a hectare. You know, the dense rainforests of the Western Ghats would have maybe 800 trees a hectare. You're planting 45,000,
45,000.
40,000 saplings. Every meter, every half a meter, you're planting really dense plantations, which they're ecologically inappropriate. In many cases, they draw a lot of groundwater. And I think these kinds of fads should be avoided. And people who are interested in these programs, in tree planting programs, if they can be reoriented to doing or contributing their effort and time and interest towards more, say, adopt a place and bring it back to its original ecosystem, or have nice biodiversity parks in urban settings and things like that, it would add so much more value. So you learn from nature and then you apply it, but you cannot recreate it exactly. There's
Yeah,
not like a
obviously.
Xerox machine.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So uh, so you do the best you can,
Yeah.
and you get a semblance of the original ecosystem. In our research, even after 20 years, we we know that some attributes of the forest recover almost entirely, like the closure of the canopy or the number of stems of trees that you've managed to establish. But it's going to take decades or even more than a century for the forest to come back in its entirety. And maybe even then, not all attributes of the forest will come back. So, restoration is something that we can use for formerly degraded sites, but not under the belief that it will completely replace an original intact mature forest
And how do we
ecosystem.
convince the government that a restoration is not a solution for the destruction?
Well, they're not even talking about restoration yet.
They're talking
They're
about
talking about
plantation.
afforestation and
They're talking about
plantations.
afforestation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And afforestation is another word, which is so strange. Strictly speaking, what it means is to establish forests in areas that never had
Never
forests
had
before.
forest. Yeah.
And by definition, that means you have to
Yeah.
do afforestation on grasslands and deserts and
Which you
savannas,
shouldn't be doing
which you
it.
shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
And, or on the beaches,
Yeah.
on sand dunes, things like that. So afforestation is a completely flawed approach, and that's where, and plantations as they are currently carried out, is where most of the effort is going, and that has to first shift. The thinking has to shift towards ecological restoration and targeting the appropriate ecosystem and so on. So that even that hasn't happened yet. So we have a long way to go for India.
This is the reason I was talking about it. All these words, afforestation, plantation, assisted natural regeneration, and it's so confusing for people. And a lot of people have a good intent. As you said so rightly about people volunteering and doing this thing, going and planting the saplings, they have a good intent.
Yeah.
They just do not have the right information. And unfortunately, either as a corporate initiative or a government initiative, it has just been pushed. People feel really good about it, that they are going and doing this job 12 hours, worked hard, feel good about it. And later you realize that it just
Yeah.
didn't work.
Yeah. And again, I feel that part of the blame is on people like me. We haven't done enough to convey these ideas well to the wider public, so that they can engage in more meaningful ways. In a few places where people have managed to do it, we've had wonderful results. I'll give the example of the Aravali Biodiversity Park in Gurgaon, where an NGO there called I Am Gurgaon involved the people of, in the National Capital Region to come and participate in the restoration of the Aravali vegetation in that
Yeah.
area. And today that place is completely transformed. It was a mined site. I've written about it in one of the chapters
Okay.
in the Trees of My Country. So people can bring about fantastic amount of change, but how do we engage them, and how do we direct that interest and that effort well? That's a challenge. And for speaking for myself and for others on our team, we are often more comfortable working on our own. We like being in forests, we like being among animals and trees. We're not very good at dealing with people.
No, that's the reason I
So
pulled you here, so that
yeah.
we can talk about these things. See, the purpose of, very frankly, Some Like It Wild is to reach out to a larger set of people who are interested in these things. And this becomes a medium because we are just having a conversation in a as simple language as possible so that people are able to gather the information and do the right stuff. That's a larger purpose which I see for a podcast like Some Like It Wild. uh, because the other side is very, they are clued on, they know everything, they have been researching, they have been doing it on the ground. So they have the information, but there is a very large audience which is interested in these, but the maybe lack of information or not being able to find information at the right time becomes a bit of a problem.
Yes, and lack of avenues for them to engage as well.
Yes, that also is there.
With
Yeah.
projects of
Yeah,
this
like
kind.
you spoke about Miyawaki, and even before this podcast, we recorded with Dr. Abi, and he also spoke about a Miyawaki, that how flawed it is. And he also made a statement saying that if you have to water, then you shouldn't be planting.
Yes, yeah, that's a very simple index of it, right? Because ideally, you want the plants to take care of themselves,
Yeah,
and in restoration, you want a sort of a self-willed, self-running ecosystem. And if you choose the right species that have always been in that
landscape. Yeah,
environment, given the climate and the soil and the rainfall and so on, then you don't have to mollycoddle it, right?
yeah,
And go and water it every week, etc. It will establish on its own. It will also not overdraw the resources of that place. In many plantations that Forest Department and various others have established, we find that actually it leads to a drop in the water table
yeah,
because you've planted so many trees
yeah.
that they have,
It's bound to happen.
uh,
It has to pull the power from the water from
exactly.
the ground
Yeah.
itself. Where else the water is
So
going to come
there's
from?
several such
Yeah,
negative
incidences.
consequences that can be
Yeah,
avoided
yeah,
if we channel these efforts right. Tree planting itself, is and the way that people like to do it, um, it's in one sense it's an indication of the success of the environmental movement. You know, everybody thinks planting a tree is a good thing,
yeah.
and we've spent decades and decades trying to drive that point home, and now it's home, but it's going somewhere else, right? So yeah.
So going back to the point of the brown palm civet, which inspired both of you, you and Divya, to start off the whole rainforest restoration journey, and it's more than 2 decades now you have been doing it. What kind of difficulties did you face when you start off this whole initiative, project, program, however you want to call it, or your life mission?
Yeah.
It's being a hardcore researcher, scientist, and then you go sit down with a with somebody who owns a land and says that give me the land. I'm going to do a rainforest restoration, which is not going to give you any revenues or a profitability. How difficult it was to convince the first landowner, and how did you manage to get more number of?
Yeah, it was quite difficult. We initially thought our biggest challenge would be growing the plants, but then the civets had shown us that that's not such a big problem. Actually, most of the problems have to do with how you engage with other stakeholders, with society. And so our work on restoration began in the Anamala Hills with a company, which at that time it was with the Hindustan Unilever Limited. They had large tea estates in the Anamala Hills, but within the tea estates there were patches of forest that had been logged in the past. There had been some plantation there of coffee or other crops, but they were disused now. But for us, we could see the value in those locations. So we began to talk with the managers. First step was to just go and share our findings and our work with them. You have to develop a trust and a relationship with them, that they see that you're genuine, you've been doing some work on the ground, you know what you're talking about. Then we try to slip in these ideas, saying, okay, why don't we restore rainforests? Or and in one case, one of the managers was interested. He said, "Oh, it's tree planting. Sure, why don't we plant teak and rosewood?" So, and we had to say, no, teak and rosewood, they are found in the deciduous forest. This is an evergreen forest. It has totally different species, and you slowly kind of introduce these ideas. And of course, they are aware of it, but they had not thought of it on those lines. And it took nearly 2 years of constant meeting and dialogues to get the first person on board. So that was one challenge. After that, there's been a lot of cooperation, and they see that uh, since it's not also affecting their crop in any way, the cropped area is continuing and their business is focused on that. These are areas that were sort of a no man's land. It was outside protected areas, so the forest department wasn't looking at it. It's outside the cropped fields, so the planters were not focusing on it. And so we kind of stepped in to bridge that gap and say, okay, let's revive biodiversity here. And it sort of worked out. The
That was
other
2001.
That was
HUL happened in
2001. Yeah,
2001. Yeah.
2001, 2002 is when we started our first planting and
And
set up
before
a
that,
nursery.
you already set up the nursery.
We had a small nursery in our garage to start with. But Hindustan Unilever at that time gave us space in their tea nursery.
Okay.
And we had a very nice nursery set up there, and which later moved. The nursery is now in land provided by Tata Coffee Limited, which is
Okay.
another partner. We've also helped some of the companies start their own nursery. Another partner called Pari Agro Industries. They've set up nurseries now. So we have
Multiple nurseries
We have
now.
multiple nurseries
Yeah.
now to
I
support
don't
this
remember which
program.
one I went to with Divya.
Yeah.
One of the nurseries I have been to.
So that's our nursery. We call it the Rainforest Plant Nursery. But the other challenge for restoration programs is that restoration is inherently a long-term activity. Like I said, and especially if you're focused on growing trees.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. But and we depend a lot on support, on funding, from philanthropy, from conservation agencies to support this kind of work. And most of them support for short periods of time. They want to support something for 1 year, and you want to see results at the end of it, right? What was achieved. And so persuading agencies of that kind to support long-term restoration, support an organization in place, saying, okay, this is going to take a decade, it's going to take 2 decades. Let us support and see them through this. That was very, very hard in the initial years. And it's only after nearly 15 years that we started getting people who would give us consistent year-on-year support, who gave us multi-year support, and saw the value in what we were doing.
15 years. So the patch which you did start working in 2001, and after 10 years when you went back to the patch, I know that you would have gone there every year, every 6 months or every month. But the day when you go and see that, oh, now it has drastically kind of changed, recovered, restored, and you see animal species, how did you feel on that day?
It feels great. It feels great that we've contributed to the recovery of the forest. Not everything that came up there is only what we did, but the trees that we planted are also growing. Some of them now are 20, 25 meters tall. Once we went to this patch of forest in Injipara, which we had restored. There's this Bischofia javanica tree that was, its girth is about this big now, and it's more than 20 meters tall, and it had this leopard scrape on it. So that was nice. Then in other places, we've started seeing animals like Nilgiri langurs come and eat the leaves. There are great hornbills that come to eat the fruits. A pair of them used to come and roost on the trees that we planted, 20 years ago. It's really nice. I mean, our restoration is focused on biodiversity conservation. We want to bring back the biodiversity. It's not for other sort of reasons. That was our primary goal. So these sorts of things, give us a lot of hope that, things are at least some of the species can benefit from this.
As we talk about the hope, do you feel somewhere that last 20 plus years of work getting misused today? Because you proved that you can bring back and you can do a ecological restoration. A lot of effort has gone into it, and it has been documented, it has been published, it has been spoken about it. Somewhere, do you feel that these kind of things are now becoming a reason for deforestation, and government gets an idea that we can do a afforestation somewhere else?
I wouldn't say it's this idea is already in their head that or it's there in public consciousness that a forest can be destroyed and can simply be grown elsewhere, and that's not true. And so when we project our results, we always say, like I've said on the show as well, that we will never be able to replace the original forest. Not all of it is going to come back. All that we have done is that we've taken a site that is heavily damaged and brought back some part of the biodiversity there. It's less damaged now, and it's a self-willed, it's a recovering ecosystem. It's still going to take decades for it to achieve um, all the attributes of a rainforest. And even then, there's so many other species in a rainforest. You think of all the orchids and the epiphytes, the ferns, the insects. There's a tremendous diversity there, which is not there in our restoration sites, and they may never come back. So we have to be very cautious when we destroy intact ecosystems, because many of them are irreplaceable. Even restoration will not bring them back.
Yeah, that brings to the mega discussion which I wanted to have with you. I don't know if that battle has been lost or there is a scope to fight, is all about the Great Nicobar Project. You mentioned in your article, which you published, I think, in Frontline, Feb 12th, 2025, and you clearly mentioned this as a deceptive fix for a irreversible ecological loss. These are the words which were used. I did a bit of a research. I have been hearing about it. We had Pankaj speaking at the festival last year, and Nicobar Galatia, that whole discussion which happened. And more I started reading, more I felt devastated with the things which are happening in Nicobar. It has more than 900 plant species, more than 1800 animal species. There are so many species which are just endemic to Nicobar, won't be found, either talking about the crab eating macaques or Nicobar tree shrews or megapod or many more. There are so many species. I don't even know if anybody could manage to go and really document what all Nicobar has got it, because access is also a bit of an issue. A place like this, which is as pristine as you can get, now on the verge of getting destroyed. Or obviously, maybe it is just started off, which we are not aware of. It is also a UNESCO World Biosphere Reserve. And when I was doing it, I figured out that they are going to cut 9.6 lakh trees in Nicobar. For what? To have an international container transshipment terminal in a place such as Galatia Bay, which is a nesting site for the giant leatherback sea turtle, Green Shield International Airport, gas and solar hybrid power plant, eco township and smart cities, includes high-end resorts, maybe casinos and blah, 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 blah. Insane amount of money which is going to get pumped here on the cover of India security.
Yeah. So, I mean, the cost is humongous. It was initially, I think, about 72,000
To
crores.
84,000 crores.
Yeah, but now I think
That's
it's
the
already, the
range.
estimate has changed to over 90,000
Yeah.
crores, if I'm not mistaken. And it's a very serious project, and there appear to be many different dimensions to it. The first thing that I'd like to say is that we have to see how unique Nicobar is in the Indian context, from the, let's say, from the nature conservation perspective. India is one of maybe just two countries in the world that has 4 biodiversity hotspots. And one of the biodiversity hotspots is the Sunda region, which includes just the Nicobar Islands within India. It's south of the even the Andaman Islands belong to the Indo-Burma biodiversity hotspot. The Sunda region is a different biodiversity hotspot because it has a very unique set of species. And the best representatives of forests are there. And you already mentioned the diversity of species there. I'd also like to mention that Great Nicobar Island is home to two indigenous
Yes.
communities,
Yes.
right? That is the Nicobaris, who were already affected during the tsunami,
Tsunami.
and
Yeah.
they have been relocated from areas.
Yeah.
They've been wanting to go back to their homes.
Yeah.
And now, where the project is coming, it's going to be difficult to accommodate them back in their ancestral homes. Then there is the Shompen, a forest dwelling
Chompen.
called particularly vulnerable tribal group, PVTG. Maybe a few hundred left on the island. And anthropologists working there have interviewed them, and they very clearly say, in their own words, they have said, don't come into the forest. You are doing something, do it where you are near the coast. Don't come and destroy our forest. And I think we have to ask ourselves, what are we willing to sacrifice as a nation in order to do a project of this kind at this scale? And is this scale really necessary? Maybe there are some parts of that project that are truly necessary for India's defense. But if you read the documents of this project, the defense component is actually quite small, and it may not have such a substantial impact. And I don't think people will protest for that part. But why an entire new city? Why so much emphasis on tourism? Casinos and golf courses and resorts up and down the coast, and the push to increase the population of the island from a few thousand today to more than 4 lakh people. It's an absurd escalation of impact on a very unique island whose the bulk of the ecosystems have remained pristine for a very long time. And there is a lot of development you can do right now. There is even today, there is not even a good hospital on the island. People have been asking for basic good medical facilities and hospital. It's not there. Even this week, I think people are protesting saying our LPG supply is not there. They're not able to manage with that. We have not even invested in this basic development, which we can do right away. And I don't think anyone, no environmentalist, is going to object to these things at all, even the defense needs. But do we really need to destroy 130 square kilometers of pristine rainforest for this? That's the question that we have to ask ourselves, not as individuals and also collectively as a nation. Is this the best approach to take? The tree felling part is what has puzzled me a lot, because the number of trees that is mentioned there, about 9 lakhs, somehow doesn't make sense. If you've worked in a rainforest and you go into, like I said, a good forest with, if I count all the trees which are about this girth and above, 30 centimeter girth and above, I can expect 600 to 800 trees per hectare. And 130 square kilometers is 13,000 hectares. You do the math. How many trees are likely to be there in that? Even if, for some strange reason, they have said that only half the area will be felled. Even at half the area, my rough calculation that I have made is that it will be roughly 10 times the number of trees that is being mentioned here. It somehow something doesn't make sense. And this goes back to our earlier discussion,
Yes.
about the EIA.
Yeah.
That environmental impact assessment.
Yeah.
Where is the basis for that number? And somebody who spent 7 days, 8 days on the island, can we rely on this figure? Shouldn't, even if we want to go ahead with this project, shouldn't we at least know what it entails truthfully and say that, yes, I understand this is the level of damage that we must cause, and it is important for India for me to damage this island so much. Let us at least understand that and then proceed. So that transparency, I feel, is right now missing, and we need to question ourselves about this and figure out if maybe there is a compromise or there is some other.
Well, Sridhar, I think what you said so rightly is that nobody is going to question if it is for the defense, and defense doesn't need this kind of a space. How many hectares will they need? Forget about the hectares. How many acres will they need it? Even if you want to have a best possible defense, naval base, air force base, how much of land will you need it? And nobody is going to ever question about the safety of the country. But it is not about the safety of the country.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really qualified to talk about the defense or the commercial angle and so on, but it's clear that there's a very large commercial and tourism angle to
Yeah,
this
right.
project,
Yeah.
right? So that part is something that we should, I feel personally, reconsider. As individuals and as a society, we should debate about it. We should reconsider. We should try and find via media, because this is not any random piece of forest. It is one of the most beautiful pieces of forest that we have left. The indigenous communities have protected it for hundreds of thousands of
Centuries.
years, and there are many species there which are irreplaceable. And that forest, if you destroy it, you're definitely not going to get it back by planting trees in
In
Aravallis or
Haryana.
Haryana. Yeah, and compensatory
It is
afforestation.
so absurd, so illogical that you are talking about destroying a forest, a rainforest, evergreen rainforest in one area, and talking about doing a afforestation. Let me
Yes.
use the word afforestation here in Haryana. What is the connection?
It makes no sense. It's completely absurd.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the reason that when we started the whole discussion talking about it, how do we get a larger number of people to get to know that this is the scene, and they have to support the conservationists, ecologists, that this is not done. Why
Yeah.
are we doing
Yeah.
this?
And lots of things intersect here. So it's not just the afforestation in the Aravali, right? We spoke earlier about how the Forest Conservation Act has been diluted, and
Yes.
amendments have come
Yes.
in. One of the amendments has made it possible for you to do certain activities which are not considered a non-forest activity anymore. So in the Aravalis, besides the plantation, a big safari park is going to come.
Yeah, I heard the
For the
news.
amusement of people. Imagine
Yeah.
putting animals in cages and have
Yeah.
people going around looking at them and having fun. It's pure entertainment, but it's not considered a non-forest activity. So which means that it is not a violation of Forest Conservation Act. These kind of absurdities are something that citizens of India should be really concerned about. And it's something that if we can, and that's why the protests that we saw for education, one day I'm hopeful that we will protest
For
about the
the conservation,
environment
for the environment.
for on issues
Then I
such as
wanted to
this.
ask one question to you when you started this whole conversation, and I think it's relevant to ask now, is that how do you keep yourself motivated and continue doing what you're doing it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just me, right? The
Yeah,
whole
I'm not
world
talking
of
only about
yeah
you, the whole community.
the world of conservationists and people grappling with environmental issues. We've had to invent new words to deal with this. There's a mental health crisis among the professionals, because they're just seeing these kinds of damage on a daily basis. Ecosystems that you've come to understand being vanishing in front of your eyes. There's this word called solastalgia that has been brought about just to describe
What
the
is
feeling
okay?
of how you feel alone, and when nature is completely being destroyed around you and species are disappearing, and that feeling is very common nowadays among a lot of people. But I take heart in some of these movements, and the fact that we can engage in conservation. We should strengthen regulations on one side, but we should also learn to work with people much better. And if you take examples from, say, the Soliga community of the Bihar Hills, or the Idumishmi in Dibang, which the people I visited when I was doing this book, The Trees of My
That also
Country.
was used bit wrongly. The way they do the cultivation,
Which one? Sorry,
the community.
the Jhum.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a different story. But what I was saying is that these communities have learned to live with nature and to protect nature, and to uh, uh, and tomorrow, if we are thinking of conservation, we should tap their knowledge and take their help and work with them. So that's one aspect. The other one that you spoke about is on what's called shifting cultivation, or
Yeah,
Jhum.
shifting
Yeah.
cultivation. Yeah.
So you'll see a lot. My research in my master's was on Jhum and shifting cultivation, and I think that's another place which has been very, very wrongly projected in the hill states of northeast India, as well as along the eastern Himalaya. Today, as you have this practice of agriculture called Jhum, or shifting agriculture. It's called by various names in among all the different communities there. In Mizoram, for instance, it's called Lo. So there are different names. And it used to be much more extensive even in parts of central India, South India. But it's during the British period, the colonial powers deliberately suppressed this form of agriculture, saying that it is highly destructive of forests. And why is that? When you see shifting cultivation being carried out, even you might think it's very destructive of forests, because a farmer would go into a plot of land, it's about 2 3 hectares. They would cut all the trees and bamboo and let it lie on the ground, and then wait for 2 3 months for it to completely dry, and then they will burn it. And you have these spectacular fires which appear to have just destroyed the forest. But why is the farmer doing this? The farmer is doing this because they are performing a form of agriculture with no external inputs. There are no fertilizers used, there are no chemicals and pesticides used. So, where do you get the nutrients to grow the crops? And you can't grow crops under the shade of dense forest. So, after the forest burns, the ashes enrich the soil, and for 1 year, sometimes 2 years, maximum 3 years, they may cultivate that plot of land. Then they have to move. They move to another plot of land. And people say they abandon the field. I don't like to use the word abandon because nobody abandons land really. Even if they're not working on it, the farmers
They
are
still like
still
to.
they're still holding on to the land. It
Yes.
still belongs to the
Yes.
community. They are monitoring to see what comes out of it. And they have rested the land. They are allowing the land to recover through a process of natural regeneration. Again, you asked the question earlier,
Yes.
right? What is natural regeneration? Forest spontaneously grows back.
Yeah.
And that process, ecologists call secondary succession. The vegetation coming back in different stages is called secondary succession. It's a form of natural regeneration. And the forest is allowed to come back for a certain number of years until it accumulates enough biomass for the farmer to come back and cut it again and grow crops. It's a rotational cycle. So every year they move from plot to plot, come back to this plot after many years. And that cycle is called the Joom cycle, right? And it's a remarkable system of agriculture if you think of it. It's entirely organic, it works with nature, and they grow a humongous diversity of crops. A single 2 hectare field may have 30 different crops, 5 varieties of rice. It's remarkable if you see in terms of agrobiodiversity as well as the practices. The problem is that the space for this kind of agriculture has continued to shrink over a long period of time. Why? Because protected areas and reserve forests are established, and now you're not allowed to perform it there. Large plantations are created, teak plantations and rubber plantations and so on. Again, the space for this shrinks. When land area shrinks, the farmers have to rotate much faster.
Much faster.
They don't have
Yeah.
time to wait for the forest to recover substantially. So the Joom cycle, as we say, shrinks. And that can lead to local degradation. But it's often induced externally. It's not because of something that the farmer is doing wrong. It's because of all the forces at play that have made this happen. Now, how does this translate in terms of how the government and how we monitor our forests? Very often, if you read the Forest Survey of India's reports on forest cover, they will have one line somewhere which says so much forest loss in Northeast India due to destruction by Joom cultivation. But actually, the states that have shifting cultivation are still today the states that have the maximum forest cover in the country. So there's some contradiction there. And these forests are constantly renewed. They are taking secondary forests and the forests are coming back. So only a fraction of the landscape at any given time appears deforested. That is where they are actually, growing
Cultivating
crops.
at that point of
Rest
time.
of the landscape is just
It's regenerating.
regenerating forest. Unlike in the case of plantations. So if you remove that and say, no, this is a destructive practice, to stop it, let me establish a teak plantation. That's a permanent loss of forest cover because you have lost the forest and you now have a monoculture. Of one species, which is teak, maybe not even suitable for that place.
Or a
plonked
palm.
there. Yeah. Or oil palm. Yeah. Oil palm is now spreading in Northeast India.
Yeah.
I've written about it extensively in the wild heart of India because a lot of my experiences from Mizoram, from the shifting cultivation landscape, and this whole, sort of lopsided way of looking at this practice I have tried to explain there, and we need to change that again. We need to recognize the various values and the good parts of shifting cultivation practice, and see how uh, that can be sustained, maybe improved in certain ways, but through involving the farmers rather than putting it down as a destructive practice.
Yeah,
So that's a totally
yeah. There
different
are,
story.
yeah, different way of looking at it altogether. So I think that is where the whole nature writing comes into the place, that how we are able to write these things down and share with people to consume and get to know better. Because if you look at a science writing versus nature writing, I see there is a bit of a difference as per me. And if we are looking at connecting with a larger community, I think the nature writing is more
It's more
useful.
important,
Yeah.
and I personally believe it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have written all these
Yeah.
essays and books. And I think you're very right in what you're saying, that there is a difference between science writing or science communication and nature writing, even where it concerns nature. So, science writing about nature is often about exposition. I'm trying to tell you something. Okay, here is research. It's found this wonderful thing, and they spell it out in plain English and so on. And yes, that's interesting and that can evoke wonder and people can get interested in it. But it misses on various other dimensions of the human experience of nature. And the person I like to fall back on this is Lauren Isley. Lauren Isley wrote a number of books: The Night Country, The Firmament of Time. So, classics in nature writing. He was an essayist, and his books, if you read, he talks about some of these things, but he brings in various other dimensions. And he says it's really important to bring in those additional dimensions of the human experience. You know, pathos, melancholy, your anger, and, philosophy of your view, your worldview, how you are looking at the world, often influences the way you do your research or the way you carry out certain actions. Ethics, aesthetics, the aesthetic appreciation of nature. A lot of this is missing in regular science writing. And I think nature writing is trying to, good nature writing is something where it can extend the boundaries of that, and try and encapsulate human experience in words. So that I think has been at least my attempt at.
Yeah, so that leads to one very large question. We have discussed about it, is that in pockets we have seen the success. In pockets, people have been talking about it. Either is to do with forest deforestation as such in different parts of India, or is again Betwa or Rishikesh and all those issues. These are small pockets, small successes. The bigger challenge with regard to the environment is like really looming on us. How do we drive the change? Do you think the way the education system is, do we need to relook at the way the current generation being educated? How do we bring back, or not bring back, but how do we bring nature into education?
If you'd asked me this question 3 weeks ago, I might have had a different answer. But after seeing the protests that have happened in the last 2 weeks, I feel that more than trying to teach the younger generation, there is stuff that we can learn from them. And I've also felt for a very long time that when we talk about the environment, a lot of people, usually adults, will tell me, you should teach the children about this. You should get children involved in this. And I think children perhaps don't need as much attention on this as the adults do. Children have an innate affinity to nature. If we can open up that experience and the opportunity for them to be in nature and learn from nature, they will go very quickly ahead of us. But among maybe my generation and the previous generation, I feel that adults need to pay a little more attention to the environment and nature, and because they also have a disproportionate effect. These are people who are having a direct effect on the environment. They may be in positions of power and
Yes.
influence.
Yes.
They are the people who are voting and maybe deciding how the country should move. So bringing about a change in mindset, in knowledge among the I would say middle-aged people and some of the elders is perhaps as important or more important than targeting nature education to children. It's my personal view today. And I think it's important if we want to move to a more political sphere of bringing about change. And in the context of that, I again feel that nature writing has a role to play. Of course, you can write so much, but you need readers. People have to pick up
Yeah,
these books and
yeah,
read them.
yeah, yeah.
And fortunately, in India today, we have some lovely writing coming out. I would say if you're interested in wildlife conservation, we should be reading people like, Prerna Bindra did a lovely book called The
Yeah, she
Vanishing.
recently
Yeah,
did a book. Yeah.
Vanishing. And we have writers like Janaki Lenin, who brings natural history to life like nobody else. And we have writers like Neha Sinha and Arti Kumar Rao, who have done lovely books on connections between people and nature and on various issues. We need to get people to read more and get engaged with these issues better.
So, Sridhar, I have a very small point here. When you talk about a condition, I'm not saying that they're not reading; they are listening a lot. The behavior has changed, and that's the reason. If you look at I'm just making an assumption right now. I believe so. I don't have a data to prove it, but I believe that the way they are consuming content has changed.
Possibly. I don't know this. And, as I'm not on social media. And so um, I feel somebody who's more adept at that will have to look at this.
Yeah.
But I feel that the younger generation will find ways to channelize this knowledge and produce that kind of content. But I strongly feel that there is still a very important space for close reading and for sustained attention on issues. Say an issue like Great Nicobar or issues like human wildlife conflict in India.
Hmm.
You can only get so much from sound bites, and or quick nuggets of information, even if presented very well. You have to engage with an issue deeply. And I think reading does that very well.
Hmm.
And reading books does that better than most other things. So I would still, make a pitch for it, maybe because I'm a writer and an author. But I believe that it has a role and it has a very different role. I'm not saying it's
Yeah, yeah.
better
Yeah, I'm
than the
not talking
other.
about the in that context. I was just talking about the change in behavior in consuming content. That is just a feeling. I may be completely wrong on it, uh, because they're on the move, they're on the phones, they love to consume content as they would like to consume content. So that's the reason. Just a bit of a I can say it's more of observation which I have and nothing beyond that. The last thing which I wanted to ask, because see, more than 2 decades you have worked in restoration. If tomorrow somebody wants to do the restoration, it could be in Central India, it could be somewhere else, and they really would like to understand that what is a right way of doing it, what is the scientific way of doing a restoration. How can they find information of the work what you have done? Is it there in open source, or they have to contact you, NCF, fix up meetings and figure out how to get it done?
They don't have to contact us or NCF directly, but there is still more work to be done on this. We have tried to put most of our knowledge and findings and experiences in various formats in the public domain. There are documentaries. We produced a manual on rainforest restoration that's available for free download. Our scientific papers are there, and we've written a number of articles. I've shared some experiences here. But for a country like India, you mentioned Central India or somewhere else,
Yeah.
etc., right? The experiences that we have from the rainforests of the southern Western Ghats may not be appropriate in a completely different ecosystem. Fortunately, today, there are people engaged in ecological restoration around the country, and we are fortunate to know many of them. Over the last 2, 3 years, several of us got together and created a group. It's an informal network called the Ecological Restoration Alliance India, ERA India. We have a website, and we are slowly pooling together all our experiences and knowledge. So if you go to the website, you'll find case studies, you'll find examples, you'll find photos, you'll find project stories, blog posts about these different ecosystems. There's also a nice interface where you can put a dot on a map and saying, okay, that's where I am, tell me more. And it will pop up whatever information we have today. It may not be exhaustive, but there is enough information for you to get started in an appropriate manner, right? What ecoregion am I in? What kind of ecosystem should I be trying to restore? What would be the appropriate native species to use? Getting people started on that, we've made some headway, but there is still a long way to go. But I would take heart in the fact that today there are easily over 2 dozen groups in different parts of India, maybe many, many more, and there are many communities who have been engaged in restoration. I have colleagues who are trying to compile that uh, as well, indigenous communities. So there's a lot of others that we can reach out to and learn from, and maybe through this portal or even directly. So keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, go visit these sites, go learn from them, and I think we can do a lot more.
Thank you, Sridhar. It was lovely having this conversation, and congratulations on your new book. I will start reading tomorrow onwards.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate you taking time out and having this session. I will just quote your introduction from this book, in which you have written that it was very nice when you said that you imagine that you being a writer who turned a wildlife scientist and turned a writer again. Thank you, Sridhar.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Bye.